We now call the meeting to order. If you could please pay attention to Deputy Mayor Clear for the invocation to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise if you're able.
Father, thank you for every seat that has been filled here today. For each mind and heart that feels the presence of this room, we thank you. Only you truly know what we are setting out to accomplish today. We have ideas, visions, thoughts, and instructions. We have talents, abilities, and time to give. However, only you can see in perfect detail the end of every beginning, every project, every season, every life. Nothing is ever in vain, for even mistakes and missteps are used for good. Your righteousness transcends all our efforts and understanding. Forgive us for our pride, the pride that puffs us up and the pride that threatens to disqualify us. Strengthen our confidence in who you have made us to be. Set us free from comparison in order to work together efficiently. Bless this meeting today, all those present and watching, as well as all of the lives of those we will encounter afterward. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We now proceed with the roll call.
Mayor De La Isla.
Here.
Council members Hiller.
Here.
Clear.
Here.
Ortiz.
I made it.
Emerson.
Here.
Padilla.
Here.
Jensen.
Present.
Mays.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Lesser.
Here.
There are no appointments this evening, so we proceed to the consent agenda.
A is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller approving a special event known as 99.3 the Eagle Cruise Night 2019 and rescinding conflicting portions of resolution number 9086. B is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller providing a special event known as Juneteenth. C is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sandra Clear approving a special event known as the Sacred Heart St. Joseph Parish German Fest 2019. D is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sandra Clear granting Sacred Heart St. Joseph Parish an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. E is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller granting the Celtic Fox an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. F is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sandra Clear granting the Salvation Army an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seat concerning noise prohibitions. G is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout allowing and approving city expenditures for the period of March 2 through March 29, 2019 and enumerating said expenditures therein. H are minutes of the regular meeting of April 9, 2019, and there's a list of applications before you and staff is recommending approval.
We have heard the consent agenda. What is the pleasure of the body? We have a motion by Councilman Lesser, a second by Councilman Emerson. Are there comments or questions with regards to these items? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now enter the action items. The first action item is action item A, the resolution of the budget priorities. If the clerk would read.
A is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout establishing the city's 2020 budget priorities.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, Nick Hawkins, Deputy Director of Finance and Administrative Services, will provide a review of our proposed budget priorities for your consideration.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. So tonight we are talking about the 2020 budget priorities. If you remember, we started this discussion in February as kind of the unofficial kickoff of the budget season. For 2020, there are no changes to the 2019 priorities, but based on a recent conversation we had on the citizen survey, I just wanted to highlight some of the priorities that were listed out there and how the priorities that are in the document before you line up with those. So I'm going to talk about the top priorities that the residents had and that ETC talked about a couple weeks ago. So the top priority on the important satisfactory matrix was maintenance of city streets. As you know, we have an objective underneath the investing in infrastructure priority to achieve a PCI goal of 60 over the next 10 years with a goal of 70. We also have several objectives that are related to building a comprehensive deferred maintenance solution as well as proper investments in infrastructure building. 2 is a flow of traffic and congestion in the city. Again, I think that speaks to the objectives related to street maintenance, deferred maintenance within the city. 3 is enforcement of codes and ordinances. So these, I think, are pieced out in a number of the priorities under public safety and developing neighborhoods through policing efforts as well as objectives to find unique solutions to neighborhood issues. One example being Team Up to Clean Up, which we had a resource fair last week, and there have been several different initiatives as part of that project. 4 is quality of city water and sewer facilities. Again, I think this is included in the objectives under investing in infrastructure. And then 5 is quality of police services. And again, these are addressed in public safety through one of the objectives being strenuous recruitment of officers, proper evaluation of resources as it relates to public safety, and in developing, and then under the developing neighborhoods priority, there is an objective to continue community policing efforts. So one other piece that I will mention with this is as we get into the budget process, one thing that we will be switching up a little bit this year is how the budget is presented. And so normally we go department by department in order. One thing that we're going to do this year is group those underneath the budget priorities, and you'll see that in the budget document that you're provided, so you can see more of the relationship to how each of these departments and programs that we have in the city fit in with the budget priorities that you have set forth. And I think that will be a fruitful conversation when we get to budget time, so you can see how those are impacting the priorities that you have as a governing body.
Councilman Jensen.
Thank you. Was there any place in the survey where it differed significantly from our budget priorities?
No, I think when you looked at, I mean, really
Deputy Mayor, I saw you.
the top 3 priorities that were listed out in the survey, and we're, as I understand, the city manager's office is doing a little bit more of a thorough look to see how we're addressing those. But if you look at the top 3 priorities that I mentioned, they all align, I think, pretty well. It was hard to find significant differences, and they're things that have been talked about in the community for a long time. So I think they're fairly well addressed.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I kind of missed that. As code enforcement and code violations and housing, is that all under number 3?
Yes. So I'm sorry, I do not have the actual priority, but that's under the continuing investment in neighborhoods.
Okay.
Yes.
So it does address
those are, yes.
code issues. Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion for approval of the budget priorities. We have a second by Councilman Cohen. Additional questions? Seeing no comments or questions, we proceed by voting.
We have 10 yes.
10 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item B, if the clerk would read.
B is approval of a revised project budget in the amount of $3,194,934 and authorizing as amended improvement project number T131036, which provides for the design and construction of City Hall renovation as authorized by resolution number 8673.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Governing body, tonight we bring forward a amendment to the City Hall project. We're going to have Deputy Manager Gerber cover some items, and then from that, answer any questions that you may have related to the requests that we have before you.
Mr. City Manager, Madam Mayor, thank you. The governing body received this afternoon a memo from Jason Peak regarding this project, and I thought it might be appropriate just to run through that very briefly. We'll start with the end and what we're asking for tonight. As was read by the clerk, we are asking for a project budget amendment of $3.1, almost $3.2 million for the City Hall project. This would change the budget from the original budget of $8.2 million to $11.34 or $39 million. And then I think it's worth mentioning that we anticipate it would generate about $2.6 million in tax credits, which could be used. As you've noted in your updated CIP sheets, those numbers are in there to reflect the potential cash flow that will come from the result of this project. In the memo that Jason sent you, it detailed the times that this has been discussed at governing body meetings, A through G, the dates where it was discussed, all with the intent of making sure you had enough information to make an informed decision, which we believe that we're at that point, that the information has been presented. I think it's appropriate very briefly to go through what the project does include and what it doesn't include, just so we're all clear, because I think that was a point of confusion at the last meeting or so. And it includes renovation of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then the associated changes to the building layout and exterior repairs to the masonry and the roof. It's the result of about a year-long vetting process that gives us sustainability and a healthy building moving forward for what we hope will be the next 40, 50, or 60 years. In terms of what it does not include, it does not include moving municipal court to the other side of the building. It does not include renovations to this chamber. And it also does not include changes to the entrance of City Hall. Those particular projects are addressed, as you know, in phases 2 and 3, which is contained in the out years of the CIP. That will be your next agenda item. Finally, it's worth mentioning, I think, and should have mentioned earlier probably, that we did remove the FF&E, fixtures, furniture, and E. It's not removed from the project, but it is removed from the part of the project that we are bonding. So we heard some concerns about that as well, so that particular piece of the project will not be bonded. With that, I'll stop my comments, and either myself or Jason or any of the staff from KBS that's worked on this project will be available for whatever final questions you might have.
Councilman Lesser.
Quick question in regards to this. I basically briefed through it, but by receiving it today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I obviously have not had enough time to review it or understand. Tell me what's different on this than we've received before.
Madam Mayor and Councilman Lesser, nothing is really different. What it does is just outline, it encapsulates the meetings that this project was discussed at, and then it lays out the latest change to the budget by the removal of the FF&E. That $663,000 was pulled out of the bonding amount to make that changed request from 3.8 to 3.1 million. And then it very, very briefly spells out what exactly the project is, which has been discussed at length.
Why did we not get this till 2 o'clock this afternoon?
Councilman Lesser, I don't have a great answer for you. I apologize for that. We've just been working to try to finalize this, and again, there's not anything new that's been changed from the last time you saw this. It just sort of spells out, with the exception of the removal of the furniture and fixtures, from the bonded amount. Everything else is similar.
Thank you.
We have an individual signed up to speak on this item. If we could give the floor to Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
Saved by the bell. Wow. These early meetings, that's interesting. Might do that once in a while. I stand opposed to this request. As I've said several times on the record previously, I think what happens down here in our procedures, especially when it comes to budget items, is we're constantly pushing the governing body to accept. Then we give them late answers or no answers. I know I had trouble getting direct, straight answers about ages of equipment on this renovation problem or project. And even though I've got them, I think now when I look at the priorities of and I missed your earlier item, but I think when we look at the real priorities of what the citizens want, they want their streets fixed, they want them fixed now, they want snow plows when they need them, after a 3-day storm that run optimally and are found to be in operational condition. They want code enforcement. There's some things that people want, and City Hall renovation is just not on anybody's priority list outside of maybe staff and maybe a few people that they've talked to. I just don't see it. One of the problems you've got when you redo one of these old buildings, and I've never done one this size, but I have done some very old farmhouses and some other buildings around town. When I've been a construction manager, I've done it for private investment. And I will tell you, as you open these walls up on these older buildings, you'll be amazed what problems you're going to find. And the problems now that are going to be change orders, they're going to have to, it could run you into not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands, because you really can't see what the problems are. And as long as they're hidden, they may not really be a problem. But when you open these walls up, those systems break, they crack, they leak, where before they weren't. And I guess if you just even do a simple cost analysis on this thing of a cost-benefit ratio, we're benefiting 80 employees and we're spending about $10 million. It just economically doesn't make sense. You'd be much better served to redo Kansas Avenue, fix it quickly, take some of this money, or not spend it, but maybe you need to bond some other projects. Maybe we need to do Gage, move it up on the CIP list. I just see a lot of better priorities for spending this amount of money than renovating a space that 80 employees use. And really, the public access over there, most people never go over that site. They'll go to the city clerk's office. Some of that's done online now. They might visit the manager's office or a few offices like that, but really the public traffic's over here. I mean, this is the part of City Hall that people see. So I don't look at it as a tourist attraction. I don't look at it as something that is absolutely necessary this year. I just think when you really think it through and you look at all the other priorities out there that need done, this just doesn't meet the list. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just to double check that when all is said and done, net, you guys are really only asking for another $555,000. I realize that we have to bond all that, and we get the tax credits back, but your estimates are, at the end of the day, we're only changing the budget by $500,000.
Councilman Jensen, you're correct. That's what we're requesting in the long run. In order to be able to meet the requirements with the bonding, we have to increase it to the full amount.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, the project budget is projected to be at $555,000 more than was originally proposed when the project was previously approved in the budget process.
Thank you. And if I might, I think it's very timely that we're looking at this again this evening. Last night, well, yesterday, essentially, we lost Notre Dame, one of the most famous historic buildings in the world. And there's a growing consensus that we lost it because routine maintenance wasn't done. Routine maintenance is almost never done on historic buildings until it's too late. They're out of sight, they're out of mind. It's where we are in society. We do things that are more visible, like streets and that sort of thing. And I understand the significance behind doing that, but City Hall will never be a priority to the citizens of the community until it either falls down or burns down. That's just the nature of how it is. Most folks will never come here or interact with it. Again, that's just the nature of how cities work, especially with things going online and that sort of thing, which is why it's our responsibility to make this decision and not the public's. I think we've pared it down to a reasonable project to stabilize and ensure that it doesn't get worse than it is. And I do recognize that there's a possibility that when we look in a wall, we could find a brewing problem we didn't know about. Again, that's the nature of historic buildings. So I think what we boil this down to is a responsible project. I realize that, you know, the sticker price is rather high, but I think we've done what we can to mitigate that with the tax credits, and that at the end of the day, the difference is only $500,000, which is not much in street repairs, especially if you have to do full depth replacement. So given the work that's been done, I will move to approve it.
We have a motion for approval. We have a second. Now we have Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a question on the tax credits, because when I look at these, I want to just make sure we're not comparing apples and oranges. But when we say that there's a net of $555,000, it shows that the tax credits are included in the current proposal, but not the previous proposal. Were we not going to apply for those under the previous proposal, or are we not eligible for them, and then we have to do the additional bonding in order to get them?
Madam Mayor and Councilman Mays, the intent, I believe, with the short study was that we would have applied for tax credits, but that study wasn't far enough down the road to have really formalized anything like that. When we're talking about the net of 550, the net is what the current project budget of 8.2 is, plus the addition minus the tax credits. So that's where that net 550 comes from, or 555, excuse me.
If I may.
Absolutely.
So the original budget of 8.2 million under the short study, if you would, hypothetically speaking, if we were to have proceeded with that and applied for the tax credits, the net on that probably would have been, $1.5 million, $2 million less.
Madam Mayor and Councilman Mays, given the layout and the scope of that study, it's difficult to say, but I think had we progressed down the path we were going down, I think that's likely, yes, that there would have been tax credits associated with it.
So I guess I just want to point out that I don't necessarily think that the 555 million is an accurate number, but I think that we're really raising it by a couple million probably. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor.
It irks me when people say we are only doing this for 80 people that work in the city. What do those 80 people do? They run the city. They are important people. Yes, let's just wait until the building falls down and get hit with needing millions of dollars. We've already determined, it's already been proven, we have waited this long and how much the cost has went up. To me, it's a no-brainer. Why would you wait longer so the cost could go up even more? I will approve of this.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. Got a couple of observations and a couple of questions, so I'll just go through them. First, I just want to say how much I appreciate all the work that's been done by a lot of people on this project. And the recent sync up of the budget and the time frame so that it kind of got it all in order. I also appreciate the fact that we're now pretty sure we can go after 2.63 million and change in tax credits. And as my colleagues had mentioned, it gives me great comfort, especially moving into the CIP and CIB in a moment, to know that that could be offset and very likely would be offset. I have two questions about that. One, is, did I understand correctly from some secondhand information that perhaps we could phase this such that apparently tax credits sometimes are available and sometimes they are not, and there was some conversation that we could perhaps go after them in 2 different sets rather than having to wait all the way till the end? Any answer's okay, I just wanted to check.
Jason, can you answer that, please?
Yes, governing body, you could phase tax credits. I mean, for the work that we did complete, the chillers and cooling tower, that is an eligible expense that we could see the proceeds of the tax credits come in. The timing of that likely would also be in line with completing the rest of the project. And there is an expense with the phasing, like an incremental cost for the submitting the application. So you'd be submitting 2 packages, 2 different cells at a smaller value than one aggregate.
Okay.
And so the thought process on this project was to do it at the end with one aggregate. The larger the value of the tax credits, typically the better rate of return.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't going to suggest breaking it up, I just wanted to check. Related to that, something that's troubled me all along is that we were not provided a budget and a resolution when this first came to us, just some language to pass. Is the revised budget that we got today the one that we are adopting?
City Manager.
Yes, ma'am, this is the budget for the project.
Okay.
The information was provided in the cover letter that for the particular item when it was produced for the agenda. This was simply another format. It's similar to the format that we used last time. And so we made the decision to go ahead and produce it so that as we were looking at, instead of looking at it as a narrative, that you would have it in a budgetary form. And so so this is the correct budget for the project.
I appreciate that, and in general, just because I can read it, but also it then means that the prospect of going after the tax credits will be included in our motion. Just to, if the motion is just to approve the budget, then that expectation will go after the tax credits is included.
Yes, we
Correct?
definitely go after the tax credits.
Thank you. When we talked about this last time, I asked about the entrance to City Hall and the patio and the steps and so on because I was very concerned. And I was advised that they are not included in this budget. I did some follow-up, however, and I was further advised, and Jason gave me a number today, that in fact they were in an earlier approved capital project that was a cash project, not a GO project, and that there is still over $330,000 remaining in that project. So that if we chose, and maybe that's for another day, but that we could proceed with that. And I mention that just because I think it's appropriate now, but it also then carries forward into our CIP discussions that come next based on the Phase 2 proposal, which includes over $1 million with some additional enhancements. So I just appreciate that. I can withhold comment further, but I hope that we address this. Since there's an alternate proposal, I hope we address it as a council before anything either doesn't happen or does. And third, I appreciate the fact that this budget, the contingency reappears. When I was looking at this budget that came forward in the CIP, it wasn't there, at least not for this year. When we pulled out the fixtures, whatever FFE, furniture, fixtures, and whatever that was, $660,000 last time, or when that was recommended, I wondered if we could include, and I'll direct this maybe to city manager and legal, if we could include in our motion the option that if the contingencies, if the project proceeds such that the contingencies are sustained, that the FFE could come out of the contingencies. Contingencies are $981,000 and the FFE was $660,000. That appeals to me. I could propose it as an amendment, I suppose, but is that something we could do?
I think it is legal.
Councilmember Hiller, I don't know that that's a legal question. I think that's more of a project-based question. Is that something that works for the project and the cash flow.
Okay, but it'd be okay to set that up as a contingency of project performance, I guess, in the motion.
Deputy City Manager.
I would answer similar to what the city attorney did, in that if this is approved, we would have this authority, and if you gave us the understanding that if that authority wasn't used, then it could be used for FF&E, then we would go into the project with that understanding.
Would we need to have that in the motion so that it was clear?
I think we would probably be more comfortable that way, since there has been some discussion about removing it, and since in fact we did that, I think knowing that we had the body's blessing for that would be appropriate.
Okay. Well, then I would propose an amendment that would allow the use of, I don't know how, I didn't write it in advance. If the contingency is, if project management leaves $660,000 or more in the contingency at the end of the project, I would propose that staff be allowed to use that for the FF&E.
I have a second by the Deputy Mayor. Questions or comments with regards to that amendment? Councilman Jensen.
Thank you. So if we don't earmark the contingency fund for FF&E, what happens to that money if it's not spent? It just remains in the general fund?
I can answer it. Go ahead.
Mayor and Councilman Jensen, if, just like any project we would bond, if the monies aren't spent, we would only bond the amount of the project cost at the end of it. Does that make sense? So what we do is we issue temporary notes to do temporary financing for the project, and then when the project is complete, we'll bond the final amount, and so it would just lessen the amount that was bonded
So then
after the project was
Still
complete.
spending like $8,000 on each employee for furniture. It's essentially what that boiled down to.
Well,
City Manager.
it's more than just furniture, as was mentioned by Director Peak. It is a number of other pieces of equipment and besides furniture that go into it. Some of the shelving units, some of the other types of pieces of equipment that are needed in a facility. So it isn't just furniture. Now, I don't have an itemized list in front of me, and they have identified what it would be, but those types of things it's not just furniture, chairs, tables, et cetera.
Is the intent to reuse the equipment we have now or
Yes.
replace it all?
We will use whatever equipment we can. Some of the restructuring of some of the spaces would be more beneficial for utilization of some of the modular type units that are there. And so that's what we would be looking at purchasing in certain areas in order to, those are better suited for the areas as they're remodeled.
Thank you.
Okay, we have an amendment in front of us. At this point in time, the amendment states that if the contingency dollars are not utilized, these are the contingency dollars that would be in fact used for the FF&E. At this point, seeing no further discussion, we would vote on the amendment. Oops. Soon. Once the clerk gives us the go-ahead.
Okay. Okay, we have 6 yes, council members Ortiz, Emerson, Mays, unless they're voting no.
All right. Councilman Four up there too.
I knew she wanted to be 4.
At this point in time, what we have in front of us is the agenda proposal. It did pass. The motion passed. So with that, we have in front of us voting up or down the whole project with the amendments as presented. So if there's no additional comments or questions, Deputy Mayor.
I wasn't going to say this, but hey, what the heck? Because I thought about this. I thought, how am I going to talk these people into voting for this? And this is what I thought. if you buy a brand-new car, okay, and so you have a brand-new car, but whoa, let's save some money and put bald tires on it. To me, that's the furniture. You know, you got a brand-new car, let's slap some bald tires on it, and you're gonna look just fine. I think you need to do the whole package, or you're gonna look like you piecemealed the thing. Thank you.
Councilman Padilla.
I don't know if I have a better analogy than that, but I have spoken in support of this previously, and my reasonings are, for me, just pretty clear. I don't think we would put this much discussion into whether or not we would take care of the needs in the fire stations. I think we'd jump right on that, and we'd put everything we could into making sure that those firefighters were taken care of and were given a proper work environment to protect the city. I think the same thing goes with the police department. I think the same thing will probably come around when we talk about, as was suggested, those needs that we have during bad weather. We need to make those big decisions. We really have to get down to it and just quit kicking the can down the road. And I think this is the same case with this city building. It's not of the emergency mode that I cited with firefighters and police, but it is the center of government for the city of Topeka. And we all have talked about how important, when we first start off in politics or in governing, that the local level of government is the first place to start. And that's where you have to have some pride in your city and what you're doing and how you're serving your public. And I'm not saying that it's window dressing, but I do say that in order for us to hold our head high as the capital city of Topeka, we need to take care of what is obvious and quit quibbling about details. I really congratulate the staff and Councilwoman Hiller for all the work that they've done to dig down into the details and to come up with alternatives. And I think maybe the very first proposal caught us all by shock, and I think that's still a residual effect of what we're doing now. That we're still trying to get over that initial shock, but I think this is a reasonable proposal. I think it's something that we have to do. I think it's something that we'll look down the road in easily 2 to 3 years and be glad that we did it, even though it might have hurt at the time. Thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. As you guys have probably heard, I've been on the other side of this project, at least this amendment. And I guess I just wanted to clarify that I am in no way against doing the remodel on City Hall. It's just simply the amount of money we're spending on this one project. We have very few street projects in Topeka, even the most complex, that are $12 million. I think of 37th Street from Burlingame to Gage, which we worked on, was about a $6 million project. That's about, went from 2-lane rural road section to storm sewers. I guess it's 3 lanes wide now, retaining walls, sidewalks. And when I see our priorities that our citizens, we paid the money to do that survey, and our citizens are saying streets, 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 streets. And we say that's important, but yet when we go to spend our money, we don't necessarily do it with the same priorities that our citizens might have. So that is my only issue. KBS is a fantastic contractor. Trainer is a fantastic architect. And if this could have been done in the original budget, which we did pass last year, and I voted for last year, I'm wholeheartedly for it. It's just this amount at this time, given our other needs. So not against the project, just against this amount on this one project.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. Well, I won't be buying a new car because I don't have no bald tires. I'd probably go to Harold's down the street and get some. In all seriousness, we do need to remodel. Councilman Padilla, but we're not falling apart. We're the bare minimums I could see, but some of the other stuff I can't. When you go to the fire stations, and I've been here for 15 years, And these walls in here look a lot better than in there. I just feel like I can't support this right now. I do want to see us get remodeled. I do want to see that. I just don't think the timing is right. Because I agree, I think there's other things before this renovation. And I'd like to see us have more time to really look and see, is that what we really, really want to do, you know? I agree the roof needs to be repaired, and I agree that there's some other things, but it just really bothers me when we go out to some of the stations. So are we saying this group of people is more important than this group of people? Are we saying, and I'm not asking you, I'm just saying in general. And you know, I watched Fire Station 5 that had a gap this big before we remodeled it, you know. But our stations are in bad shape. I've talked to some of my constituents, and they like that the municipal court is on this side, because they don't have to deal with the other side. They just felt like the bells and whistles on the other side were, I mean, the first plan we got, it was overwhelming. It was very overwhelming, and people were like, what are you guys doing? So right now, I just can't support this. I like to thank staff, but I'm just not sold on this yet, and I'd like to see us put this in a process where we can get some of the other things done before we get this done, or prioritize that. And we haven't done that. I don't think we've done that. I just feel like, you know, we've got the Holiday Building, we've got issues over there. I mean, and again, we just keep saying to the stations, oh, we'll get to you. Oh, you're in the CIP. Oh, this, oh, that. I'd like to see our staff compile a list of all the buildings that we have and the issues that we have. That's what I would have loved to see, instead of just, we're going to renovate City Hall. Thank you.
City Manager.
Councilwoman Ortiz, in regards to that, we are in the process of accomplishing that, and it's been accomplished on a number of our buildings. We have asset management staff that have gone out and reviewed needs that are in each building. Dr. Peak can give you a better rundown on which ones have been completed, but that is part of the process that we're doing for asset management, similar in a way to what we did with our streets. So we're in the middle of that process right now.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
That would have been very helpful to me if I would have had it before this process. And I appreciate that we're doing it, but I'm just saying it would have been helpful to me so I could see and not just guess, you know. But I've been to the stations, and I understand some of the issues that they're having. You know, somebody sent me some brown toilet water when we went on one of the when we went to vote on something with the fire station. They're like, look at this, look at this. Sandra has been through, and you've come up to gave me a list of a lot of stuff that I didn't even have, and it would have just been very helpful to have that information, so that in my mind I know that's been taken care of, or you know, I can say, okay, now it's time for this. But I think with City Hall, I think we can probably get a couple more years out of it, maybe. I don't know that because I don't have the list, and I would like that. Thank you.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I go back a little farther than lots of people do. I remember the last time that that the renovation took place here. I remember that because I would pull the cable from one end of the hallway on my knees in the ceiling to the other end. I remember McGivern Painting and McGivern Construction doing a lot of the work there. And I remember the comments all the way back then in 1986 or 87 about the condition of the building all the way back then. I too share the same feelings with Councilman Emerson in regards to, I don't necessarily have an issue with the renovation of City Hall if that's the way that we decide that we want to go. And quite frankly, I don't have issues with the diligence, and I think the work that Dr. Peak has done on this since he took over here, to be quite honest with you. And he took over after it already started. I do, however, have numerous issues with the process, the way it's been done. I don't know that the answer is renovating City Hall. I don't know that the answer is not building another building. I don't know what the answer is. I do know that there are buildings that do reach a point, because I stayed on the Kansas Avenue Bridge and watched the demolition of First National Bank come down. So I do know that sometimes buildings do reach the end of their life expectancy. I understand Councilman Clear, and I think that our 80 employees here are just as important as any of our other 80 employees anywhere else. That being said, I can still do math of what the amount of furnitures and extra equipment that have to do to, I mean, you still have to divide the math by what the expenditure is going to be by that number, and it is what it is. I'm, you know, part of this process has bothered me. You know, at the end of the day, you've told me I've got a revised budget on the project that I received for $10 million that I got at 2 o'clock the day I'm supposed to vote. And that's been a continual problem. Not on this issue, but lots of issues recently. And I think that to a certain extent, while I don't know that there's any intent on it, this memo is disingenuous to say that $555,000 is the only amount that we're over what we had been requesting, because Councilman Mays is exactly right. We were going to get tax credits prior to that. Would it have been the same $2 million? No. But that's disingenuous. That's just not accurate. And that's playing with the numbers and handing things to people to make them think that's what it is, and that's not accurate. And that disappoints me. And I'll not be voting yes on that.
Thank you, Councilman Lesser. Deputy Mayor.
Staff can't say this, so I will. They said that information was just another form of information we've already got. We've been given so much information, so many different ways, so everybody could understand it. So it's not that they didn't give it to us till 2 o'clock today. They didn't give us in that format till 2 o'clock today. But we had that information.
Councilman Lesser.
Did you get it before I got it? Because I got it at 2 o'clock today.
Not in that format.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing that everybody Councilwoman Heller.
I wasn't going to speak again, but I just want to clarify some things. I don't know that it'll change Councilwoman Ortiz's vote, but just for clarity, this Phase 1 is only the main building, and it reserves where the credit union used to be, is proposed to be a community space to just wall it off and leave it for later. This phase does not move the court. And this phase does not do the big grand landscaping that's proposed out front. It's only to do the building, some of which is already torn up because of the installation of the chillers. And those had been planned for a long time. And we know, we've been around, there were plumbing emergencies that caused people to tear up certain walls and have to get new carpeting and put them back already. The building is at that stage. And so I too am troubled about how we sort of backed into this point. But, and everybody knows I want to squeeze every one of those nickels, but once you've got the walls torn up and there is value for your staff and attracting new staff and for your city to do that, I wouldn't do it for that alone. I like the building the way it is. But I appreciate the historic elements and the consideration in the design, and I don't want to do it twice. And if what would happen if we don't pass this is they have to patch it up and then either leave it that way for a long time or do it again at additional expense. I don't mind putting things off, but I don't want to do this one twice or have it just patched up. When we get to the capital budget, I will be proposing to push off phases 2 and 3 to years 6 to 10 until we have done exactly what you said, which is have plenty of time to consider them and the elements in them before we would put them in a capital budget, because we haven't had that time. So just saying that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Councilman Jensen.
Just remind everybody that you're voting on budget authority, not actual expenditures. So if the costs for this come back significantly less, we'll spend less money. All we're doing is setting the maximum amount of money that could be spent on the project, not what actually will be spent on the project.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. That was not my understanding, I guess. I'm a contractor, and very, very seldom do we spend less than we're allowed to. I'm just saying it's a fact, right? You're not going to come in $2 million less than this. I mean, it's a reasonable estimate. It's just the amount of money here. So go ahead.
I think to that point, Councilman Emerson, we are looking at a design-build project. The work has been done between the architect and the contractor. We would expect that the numbers that are presented would be pretty close to being accurate as regards. But obviously, there can be adjustments as the project continues, and so that can be an issue relative to either saving money or utilizing a portion of the contingency. But I think with the design-build process, we are looking at something that is in this category, because they've done the work to figure out the numbers that we'll end up with.
Councilman Lester?
The only thing I would want to point out, too, is we did just also, by that amendment, spend $600,000 of the contingency.
Okay. At this point in time, we have an amended budget presented to the body for the approval of City Hall renovations. At this point in time, when the clerk is ready, we proceed by voting.
Okay, the motion failed. We have 5 yes and 5 no.
Motion fails.
Who's number 4?
I don't,
Ms. Ortiz, Emerson, Mays, Cohen, and Lesser voted no.
okay, so the motion fails. We move on to the next item.
Yes.
Item C, if the clerk would read.
I wasn't you wanted before. You want to say something?
C is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and adopting the 2020 to 2029 capital improvement plan and the 2020-2022 capital improvement budget and approving the project budgets as attached.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I'd like to invite Deputy Director of Finance and Administrative Services, Nick Hawkins, to come forward. Nick's going to present a review of the budget process so far, say where we're at today regarding approval and what we're requesting today. We'll be prepared to move forward depending on the discussions that we have tonight.
Mr. Hawkins.
Good evening again, Mayor and members of the council. So tonight's discussion and potential action on the proposed 2020 to 2029 CIP is the product of over 2 months of discussion and debate. The plan lays out the city's roadmap to address infrastructure needs over the next several years. The public discussion began in early February with back-to-back sessions, first outlining the guiding principles of the capital plan on February 5th, and then on February 9th, an overview of the specific projects in the 2020 to 2029 CIP. Since that time, staff in various departments have worked with various members of the governing body and the public, including one-on-one meetings and phone conversations in an attempt to address concerns and/or questions regarding this roadmap. Topics have ranged from questions on specific projects, most notably the River Weir and City Hall, and have also touched broad subjects such as how we finance these projects on a long-term basis. Staff has spent several hours and days researching and providing thorough responses and believes that the CIP presented before you tonight works towards addressing the infrastructure needs in the city, consistent with the sound financial plan. With that, there are a number of potential amendments that we have captured throughout the process and have provided to you. That document is available in your packet, and we are happy to respond to any questions or concerns that you have.
Before we proceed, we have somebody signed up to speak on this item, and that way we could just address all of the questions. If Mr. Joseph Ledbetter could please approach the podium.
Thank you, governing body. I did send an email. It was about several parts of Section 4, which would include this. One of the things I'm looking for is to make sure that projects that are timeline get actually done and the timelines are moved up. And you've heard me talk about California being moved up a year. You've heard the importance about the KTA project down the road that's going to, I actually believe, pay benefits. But on other projects, I also know there's a need for Gage to be redone, and I think we've had some cost savings that we could start talking about, maybe speed up some of these projects from 37th to 45th. I also know that there's been discussion about synchronizing traffic lights downtown, and quite frankly, with the talking to different individuals I did, I think we can probably get the whole city done over the next couple of years if we'll make it a priority. And I don't think it's going to cost really a whole lot more than what you've already budgeted for that downtown. And I sent an email out on that as well, talking about some of the information I'd come up with and talking to traffic. I know that we need to do the Kansas Avenue Bridge, and I've been told that we've got that budgeted later this year, so I don't need to discuss that. I have no problems with the CIP request for the police and the zoo. They're both very well-run departments. I think one of the biggest concerns I've got when we're talking CIP is we're talking a lot about roads. And I wish we could have a real honest-to-God discussion about how roads are fixed or not fixed in this city. I think it's time to talk to the county about how they do theirs. I think it's time to talk to other cities about how they do theirs. And make sure that we don't have the hallmark of zombie potholes that come back the next day in the same place or the next week. And there is a way to fix these things and not have them keep coming back day after day and week after week. One of the things that happens when you don't fix them correctly is the water and the ice get down in that roadbed and start destroying the roadbed as well as the surface. So it makes it much more expensive. And that's not just based on what I've said. It's based on my discussions with Mr. Flanagan over at the county, Mr. Block when he was there, previous public works directors we've had down here. They've all said the same thing. You've got to do a better job of doing the crack and seal on these asphalt roads, and the potholes have to hold up. The repairs have to hold up. And I contend that when you see it, you are seeing the process. So if it's not holding up, there's obviously something wrong in the way it's being done. Now, I'm not going to berate that and continue to talk about it. I've said enough. I think a lot of these budget priorities are good, and certainly going back all the way to the county tax that we had in 2014, projects like California and others were put on the budget because we had town hall meetings over here on the city side, and I think we got 8 of the 10 projects because we did have those town hall meetings. And I remember being a part of that process. I had felt like we were not getting our share, and I think we are getting our share now. So from that county-wide sales tax. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Ledbetter. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you. So given that the previous resolution wasn't passed, how does that change the overall CIP budget? and the amount we're borrowing.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, as staff, we're going to need to go back and make changes to the budget process that we have. You would need to make an amendment to the budget to remove the $3,194,934 based on that decision. Obviously, we requested that months ago, so this still is part of the process as it being part of the budget. You'll need to make an amendment to remove that. And then we will need to do some calculations. I know that pulled out brings our 3 years at $27,386,302. So we're slightly over the 27 million, even with removal of that, and depending on what other amendments you would make. At some point, staff's going to need some time in order to validate those numbers relative to the changes. For us, as we look at it, we've made the decision that as staff, that depending on what would happen with City Hall and the Weir, if those were the only two changes within the budget, that we could make those changes and be able to move forward with a resolution. If there are more changes, then we'll need more time. It looks like Mr. Hawkins has additional comments.
Just one point on that. So if you take out the City Hall project, because if you look down on the summary sheet, which is on page 6, I believe, we did take out the historic tax credit from that total. So if you did take out the amendment, we would be at $30,026,000.
Oh, that's right. You already took out the tax credits. Excuse me. I forgot you did that on that budget.
So, Madam Mayor,
Councilman Jensen.
to follow up on that, then I would move to defer this to the first meeting in May to give the staff time to make the corrections.
City Manager.
Beg your pardon, Mr. Councilmember, if there are additional changes that you as a body would like to make, I would like to get through the amendments so that we know what amendments would need to be made. And then at that point, knowing all amendments that are on the table, we would be able to then bring back a completed sheet. Because if you make this one and then somebody else has another one that you agree with, then we're back to the same point. So we need to get through the amendment process in order to determine what changes you want to make within the budget and the CIP budget, so that then we can go back and calculate all those changes. If they're multiple, then yes, we'll need to have that time. If it's only one or two, we've already game played that. We know what we need to do in order to be able to make those changes, and we can present that to you. So I would suggest that you do, for your time that you have here, to look at any possible amendments, and then at the end, evaluate whether or not they're multiple, then we can move forward from there.
Would you like to remove your?
That'd be fine. So we need to do the amendments and then defer so we can get the final ordinance with the
If they're
amendments.
substantial, I
If they're
would suggest that.
substantial.
If
We may
it's
be
only the
able to approve them
one
tonight.
for City Hall that ends up being changed, then we would have a different attitude related to that. We would be able to present those numbers to you and show you what the changes to the budget would be. It's much simpler when there's only one or two maybe changes.
Good enough for me. Thank you.
Okay, so that motion being withdrawn, we now have the floor open. I don't know if anybody would like to start talking, having discussion, making a motion. The floor is yours. Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things I just wanted to ask and then just kind of touch on. The first of which is the Kansas Avenue Bridge. Are the repairs to the Kansas Avenue Bridge included in this?
Jason? No, they're not, sir. They're not in this budget. We had existing funds that we're using within the authorization for this year.
Okay.
Is that accurate, Jason? Jason can comment further.
Governing body, that is correct. So as part of the approval of the 2019 budget for sales tax dollars, there are what's contingency within that that's plugged into the operating fund. In addition to that, as we've said in the memo about CIP, our estimates for projects that we have let within the sales tax program, the bids have come in under that. So that contingency combined with the savings or difference in bids versus estimates gives us fund to be able to address the bridge within the authority you've given us this year.
Okay, thank you. One other thing real quick also, the gauge project from 37th to 45th, you guys all knew that I was probably going to mention that. I personally would like to see that moved up. with the engineering in 2020 and construction in 2021. I don't know what the process would be to, would I just make an amendment to do that? Okay, so moved.
So we have an amendment to move up project number 701041 up.
It's on page 81. in your
Okay.
book.
701041. Move that project up. Do we have a second for purposes of discussion? Second. We have a second by Councilman Emerson. Councilwoman Heller.
I would simply offer that I did bring some amendments today, and I think particularly with the change that just occurred about City Hall, if my amendments pass, we would be able to move it up, I think pretty much in the way you want, within our 27 million cap.
Councilman Mays.
So, thank you, Mayor. So I guess, are you proposing?
That was intended to be supportive.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out if you're hoping that I withdraw my amendment or, no, okay.
No, so
Thank you.
that's what I was going to say. I
Okay,
think that at
thank
this
you.
point in time, just for the purposes of his amendments, we don't know what Councilwoman Heller's amendments are going to be.
Right.
I think that at this point in time, the prudent thing would be to take each amendment individually, so that we can start moving.
Right.
City Manager.
You go ahead. What I would say is, remember that is a sales tax project versus a GO project. We eliminated the GO funding for City Hall. That would be a sales tax project, just for clarification, to make sure people understand which pot of money that particular project addresses. Because if her changes were in the GO side, then you would have to, that would be a sales tax project, so.
Councilman Jensen.
Okay, so that doesn't go against our $27 million cap.
Correct.
Right, all right, okay, so given that this is a different pot of money, I would ask the councilman what project he's prepared to remove or shuffle in order to create the revenue to do this project faster.
Councilman Mays.
Well, my original proposal, which I was asked not to recommend, would be to delay the 10th Street project from Fairlawn to Wanamaker for 2 years. So if that's what we need to do to get Gage done, then I would propose that, but I'll see what the temperature of the body is.
Councilman Jensen.
So I asked that because money isn't just everywhere, and so in order to have the money to do that, we only have a certain amount of money from the tax revenue. How would we pay for that otherwise? And that's not necessarily a question to you, but I can't just vote to approve something if I don't know how we're going to pay for it.
So are you making an amendment to your motion then? Or are you proposing a substitute amendment, a friendly amendment to his motion?
I'm asking how we're going to pay for it before I vote.
So in order for this to be enacted, it would have to be as a friendly amendment to make that swap.
Well, I'm not advocating for the swap yet. I'm
Okay.
asking, if there's enough money to do it, then we don't necessarily need a swap. But generally, we budget as much money as we have, and so we wouldn't have the money to move this unless we took something out. And correct me if I'm wrong, please.
City Manager, would you like to make some remarks?
Well, we've been talking among staff, thank you for admitting that you were looking at this as an amendment. So as staff, we've been looking at what the possibilities are. As we look at in 2021, Jason can touch on it more, but we looked at the possibility of that if there are excess funds, that's how we would do it rather than moving 10th. We believe that 10th Street, based on where we're going, is the right project to do at this time. But we would look at what potential funds would be available as we rolled into that project and look to approve it in next year's budget in order to address that. So, Jason, you have further comment?
I guess I just will speak to the amendment. So, the forecast you have is based on the pavement management program and what we've talked about, right investment at right time. And so, if the body does want to physically, through the CIP, change the dates, then we do need to reduce funding within those other lines within the sales tax. And so we would need direction for the governing body where you want to take that from. What I would say is probably has the most flexibility from a staff perspective is the pavement management, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, which is kind of that's where we do our mill and overlay. That's after we expend the county sales tax. We'll be doing preventative maintenance dollars. And so that's probably has the most flexibility. The Southwest 10th project, from a staff perspective, we would not recommend delaying that because we are in the process of right-of-way and easement acquisition out there. We're in the process of utility coordination. So those things are in motion for that project to happen, and to kind of put a time out on that would kind of delay and defer some expectations that have already been set out there with property owners and utilities on that corridor.
Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. Jason, maybe I should ask you this. We've talked about how this is a sales tax project. Would it be prudent if we took it out of the sales tax projects and moved it to a GO project?
So, that would provide the ability to add additional funding to streets, which isn't there today and would not impact kind of the schedule for other projects. So that would be one option as well.
Councilman Mays?
Thank you, Mayor. Can I modify my amendment, or do I need to withdraw the amendment and make a substitute motion? How about that?
Substitute motion.
I'll make a substitute motion that we move the project for gauge 37th to 45th from the half-cent sales tax projects to a GO bond project in years 20 and 21.
Do we have a second?
I have a question before we do that, Mayor.
Yeah, I'm in the same.
Councilman Thorpe.
Can we do that since that was on the ballot language?
City manager.
In the
I
half-cent.
think that project was on the ballot language,
In the
right?
half-cent city sales tax that's proposed, it's not, that wouldn't have been on the ballot. That would have been on the county side of it. That would have been on the ballot. Jason?
Yes, governing body, this project is within the Fix Our Streets, the citywide sales tax, which did not outline specific projects, just what the funds could be used for. The countywide projects are listed separately within the CIP and specify those projects directly.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. Councilman Jensen to be followed by Councilman Emerson.
So my question then is, now we're going to this $27 million cap, which we're discussing. How does this affect that? And then what would you suggest pulling out of the $27 million cap to make room for this project?
Councilman Mays.
Well, I think that's a separate discussion. I think that 27 million cap, some folks might want to raise it, and some folks might want to lower it. I think it's a separate discussion.
If I may follow, and I wouldn't disagree, I would like to have that discussion and determine what our maximum borrowing is going to be before we discuss whether or not to bring your project into that fold. Because I might be inclined to support your project if there's capacity to do it within whatever the budget cap is, but as of now, I don't know what that's going to be.
Okay, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is probably, I'm going to put Dr. Peak on the spot here, and I apologize. But we've spoken in the last few weeks, the last month or so. We're going in and replacing these concrete streets that have failed by basically doing full depth reclamation. We'll take it out and put new concrete in. There are some other methods that me and you discussed where you can rubbleize the concrete base underneath it, put a hot mix asphalt overlay much quicker. I don't know what the cost differential is.
Councilman Emerson, what I'd say is that is a treatment, right? And so we talk about right treatment at the right time. Mm-hmm. And what I'd say is that the concrete on gauge, just the quality of it, is probably not something that would be suitable for rubbleizing as a a base mixture. It seems to have some of the bad aggregate that we have. A couple of comments, we've been looking at Deer Creek Traffic Way is one of those streets, and kind of the results back from the geotechnical is that concrete is basically at the end of its life, as well as the reinforcing and stuff don't make it suitable for that rubblizing treatment. So without getting into a project by project basis, I can't give you a great answer on that, other than it's a tool in our toolkit, and as we identify projects, we'll look about what's the best cost for either replacement or rehab of a street.
And I appreciate it. Just the reason for my question was simply if it's something, if that moved it by like $1 million or something, it might be germane to our discussion. But thank you. I do understand what you're saying. Thank you.
So at this point, just for procedural purposes, we have a substitute motion that is hanging out without a second.
Second.
Thank you. Now we have a second to the substitute motion. At this point, yes.
I have a procedural question too. It sounds like we may have a lot of amendments to consider and may not want to consider them as a package. In past years, and it's been a while, when we were working on the main operating budget, we have gone through a process of, in effect, a straw poll. And so we have simply voted on things we'd like to add if we could, we'd like to take off if we could, just to kind of see, as long as the list became, and then kind of see where we were. And do a final vote once we kind of seen what all the proposals were and how it looked. I don't know if that's something to consider or if it's possible.
My preference would be, just for the sake of ensuring that we know what the body is going to be supporting, that we were to look at the amendments one by one and allow for the body to vote up or down those amendments. That way there's clarity with regards to where, not only for us, but for staff, because then at the end of the day, it looks like we're going to have several amendments that are going to be proposed, and it's going to be very confusing to have a running list of whether it came up or did not come up. And so, Councilwoman Hiller.
I say that in part because I personally don't want the total to go over 27 million, but I support the project. I support the proposal if it's possible to do it. And so it's going to take having all the pieces on the table to have confidence about that. Now, we could always go back and revisit a vote and change our minds, I guess, or something, but you see what I'm saying?
Would it be easier if we have the policy discussion with regards to where we would like
maybe
to have our budget outlined?
Absolutely.
And if you could remove your ordinance for the risk of it not passing, because it would be easier for us to have the policy discussion of whether we're willing to exceed our threshold at this point in time, and then we bring back your motion? Perfect. So the motions have been removed from the floor, and at this point in time, we are going to address, before we go anywhere else with amendments, our budget cap. So, and I take it that Councilwoman Hiller, you have a proposal with regards to that.
Well, I've been real clear about that. Again, people might want to know how we would get there before they would vote on that as well. But if you want me to pass out my proposals, I can.
We're addressing first the cap, right?
Sure. The cap is a presumption for me, and so that is something we talked about before, and the proposals that I have with me today are all on this list that has been raised before. It's not 100% of them, but they're all on the list, so it's nothing new. So I want to see the cap, and I think it's important that the cap be on the entire, when we're looking at a display like this, that their 5 years are displayed. I think to support the fact that we believe in that cap and that we're supporting it, I think the net of 27 million per any 3-year unit in what we're looking at, the staff, city manager chose to kind of pool years 6 to 10, so we can't even tell very much how that would add up. But I think that the front 5 years should come in under that policy, and I also think it's possible.
Councilman Jensen.
So I will make the motion to retain the $27 million cap.
Do we have a second? Okay, so we're open for discussion. Here's going to be my remarks with regards to this issue. Staff, I know the date, but and I hate doing this, but just for the purposes of discussion for the public, when was the last time that we adjusted the cap of borrowing for the city of Topeka? What year?
I believe it was 2014, right?
Voted on it 2 years ago.
But when did we establish that cap?
2010, 2011, something like that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, we have staff coming up. Mr. Hawkins?
So the $27 million cap was formally put in place in the end of 2016, I believe, with the CIP policy. Informally, it's been in place since, I think, 2009.
2009. And my concern with this is I am not all about going trigger happy with borrowing, because that's something that is of great concern not only to all of us, but I think that when we think about overall looking at a budget, we have a responsibility that we're not just making decisions for ourselves right now, but we're making decisions for my kids that are going to end up paying the taxes that we impose today. But I am a realist and also have the understanding that sometimes, especially when we have such high demand from our constituency to take care of so many issues that pertain, like the deferred maintenance that we've had on our roads and so many of the projects that we're talking about, and the houses, not the houses, but like the fire stations and everything that we have going on that is being demanded of us right now. I think that it's time for us to take a really critical look, especially right now in a time in which the interest rates are still low, and that we have the opportunity to do borrowing decisions without affecting our credit rating, which in turn is going to put us in a position of having to borrow later on for projects that we could have taken care of today at a higher expense to our kids. And I know that we currently have some reserves. I spoke with staff, and I know that we have, I think it's like 4 months of reserve. But typically, you need to have somewhere close to 6 months in order for you to be solid. And if we go through a downturn or any shifts in our economy, it's going to be very hard for the city to be able to self-sustain. So although I am supportive to pay with cash as much as we can, we also have to be very cautious on how we are managing the reserves that we have today, because those are going to potentially, depending on what we do with them, result in a higher expense for us in the future based on rates. And what may work today for our finances, because we go and we do with cash today, it's not going to be the same return on the income that we have today on that fund that we have there sitting. So as we start whittling that down, we're going to keep on losing the future value of that money. So I know that, Mike, I know that I confused you. What I'm saying is I'm concerned about us completely dipping into our reserves, because as the reserves keep growing, we have a higher amount of interest that may accrue to it. If we borrow today and we expand just a little bit, not a lot, I'm not saying let's go crazy, we are able to take care of the projects that our constituents are asking from us at a lower interest rate. The moment that we start tapping into our reserve, our rates are going to go down. When our rates go down, our interest goes up, and we have to remember that. And all that we're trying to do here, all of the projects that we're going to see are going to be projects that are going to be taken care of and approved by us. There is not going to be anything that is not going to come out of our site. So all I'm urging the body is to remember that we're making some pretty big decisions, and that maybe, just maybe, giving us some expansion, as long as we are taking a look at what's being done and it's pertinent to what our constituents are asking for, it may be judicious just for now, because we have this PCI goal that we want to meet. Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your comments, and they do make sense. My fear is that our economy is sort of inflated right now, and nobody has any idea how long it's going to be good. Our city revenues are not growing at the same rate that we would begin borrowing here. What makes me nervous is our ability to repay that higher debt is fine now, but I can't predict the future. I don't know when the next economic downturn will be, only that there will be an economic downturn. And I don't want to set a future group of folks up that have to sit up here and say, we can't do any maintenance now because we're spending all of the revenue we have paying interest on
these loans we're taking out. Now, I do agree that we need to keep reserves, and I would not advocate for spending the reserves we have. We only have so much money, and unfortunately, if we have to slow down some of the projects we want to work on in order to stay within our budget and stay within the current mill levy, then that's the unfortunate reality of the world. But borrowing more money on the chance that we'll have a good economy during the entire time to repay that, I mean, I'm not an economist, but I don't want to hedge my bets on that, and that's why I don't support raising the cap right now. We have no idea what our economy is going to be during the lifetime of these loans, and whether or not it'll still be there to repay it. That's what makes me nervous.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I totally agree with both Councilwoman Hiller and Mr. Jensen on that. My only thing is, in my analysis of like our streets right now, I guess kind of three things. First of all, I really feel like we're kind of at a critical time, especially after a bad winter, with our streets where we're really testing people's patience. So I'm worried we need to do more sooner on those rather than later. The second thing is, and Mr. Mays is up at the Capitol every day, he can probably speak to this better than I, but KDOT's going to get their stuff together here pretty soon, I think, with the highway funding. But I'm worried right now. We have the advantage, we're getting a lot of contractors from Kansas City, Bettis is here, Sunfire's here from Lawrence, because there's not a lot of highway work out. As soon as the highway work turns to a normal level, we're going to start seeing bids go up. So waiting 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years on some of these projects, it may really inflate the last thing is, asphalt in particular really has to do with oil costs. Oil's already creeping up, so I would say that's the only thing. I am totally in agreement that I don't want to raise the 27, except for where we can do street projects with the, Karen's going to take me off her Christmas list right now, but so she has worked so much on this, and I do so much appreciate it, and I agree where we can limit our borrowing. It's just with the timing of the streets right now, that's the only thing I'd be in favor of raising.
Councilman Jensen.
So is it possible to do this as a temporary increase that would have a specific length of time and then reset to the standard?
Yes.
I would be happy to make that as a substitute motion. I would be much more comfortable with setting a defined limit to when that would exist and then go back to normal. I don't know what Councilwoman Hiller thinks about that, but I do respect the fact that right now costs are low and there is availability for work, but at the same time, the long-term implications of raising the budget, that stuff almost never goes down unless it's specifically sunset and forced back down. And, these are things that make me nervous in the long term of our economy here. So if staff would have some comments on that, on a specific time frame that you would need this higher authority and what we would be able to accomplish with it, I would be interested in hearing that. But just a blanket increase for the rest of time, I can't stomach that.
And I absolutely agree with you. City
Real quick
Manager,
comment,
to be followed by Councilman Lesser and
I'll
then
make it quick.
Councilman Mays.
The issue related to the 3-year cap is an annual motion that you all decide. And so you could decide this year that, pick your number as to what you're comfortable based on the projects that you want to pursue and provide funding for, and come back and address it the following year and provide the number that you would be comfortable with for the next year, the next 3 years of funding. And so that is your prerogative. I think the other thing to remember as we have the discussion about the economy is that most of our funding, when we talk about the GO cap, we're talking about this is repaid by our debt service levy, the funds that we have that we incur interest on that are already in the bank, and that ends up being what our revenues are that pay that back. So this relates to property tax, and this is a little less fluctuating related to what happens with the economy. Not to say that it is infected over time, but it is a little less fluctuating, and that is more stable rather than being our sales tax that we're using in order to repay that. So now, as we look at sales tax projects, if the economy turns down, that's a different story. But for us, and these GOs, you talk about the 27 million cap, remember that's coming from our property tax payments and debt service levy.
Councilman Lesser.
Well, first off, I'm a firm believer you can't borrow yourself into prosperity. And you know, the one thing that is kind of missing from this is you know, the realization of what, you know, what income we make from reducing our interest cost, and assuming that we're diligent in investing those funds. And then city manager kind of jumped on my bandwagon. You know, what we're talking about here from a property tax standpoint is not, it's affected a certain amount by the economy, but it's certainly not as, it's insulated more so than the other things. And you know, I think I'm more of a believer in reprioritizing where we need to spend our money versus going to the bank and borrowing more.
Thank you. Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I would say procedurally, I feel like this is kind of a chicken or the egg type of thing in my mind, because I'm not necessarily, like, philosophically, I'm typically opposed to borrowing more money. However, for the right things, I would support it. Right now, debt is relatively inexpensive. The rates are pretty low. If the economy does somehow go south, it could be a result of interest rates rising. Also, in terms of the economy, Topeka has been pretty resistant to the wild swings in the overall economy. I mean, we've done a really good job, you know, for better or for worse, of not necessarily going with the rest of the nation. So I don't know if I'm going to support it or not, because again, it kind of depends on what's in there. If I need to vote to raise this for 1 year because Gage gets added, I might do that. But just raising it for, you know, what we could do for what we've got now, I wouldn't necessarily support it philosophically. Thanks.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Just procedurally, it's a reminder to me, I think to all of us, we have a policy that should govern everything that we do. And so, as city manager mentioned, you know, we can look at it each year. If we want to make an exception to the policy, we can, but understanding that it still doesn't change our policy. And so, you know, working on, if at the end of all these deliberations, we decide to go over it, maybe we want to be very specific in the resolution that there was an intentional 1 year increase of $2 million, let's say, but it was not intended. You know, that doesn't change our policy. Our policy would still remain. So as we proceed through this.
Councilman Jensen.
So I'm not necessarily opposed to a 1 year exemption to the policy for a specific project. Dr. Peak, is that what you guys had initially intended in asking for this increase, or was this intended to be permanent? Or
city manager?
As far as the projects that are listed, if you look at our budget, it is to be an extended situation. We've identified a number of needs related to, as you look at the fact that we added the $2.3 million to address the needs we have in our facilities. And so we need we need a source of money in order to begin to address the facility needs we have, irrespective of City Hall, all the other buildings that we have needs for. And so that was a portion of what caused the amount to go up. Felt that there were needs related to a few other areas, continuing projects with SORT, and then also the funding that we needed in order to address some of the street projects that require additional funding related to items that aren't covered by the half-cent sales tax. And so those are there as part of the project. And then also we postponed because of you look at our structure related to the purchase of fire trucks for the next 3 to 4 years, actually 5 years. We don't have one in this year, and that's partly because as we looked at the needs for the Weir and also for the City Hall project, that it wasn't feasible for us to be able to afford a fire truck in this year. It was already going high with relative to the number, and so therefore we moved the fire trucks out, 2 purchased in each of the subsequent years. So that you know, when we looked at raising this amount, it was because we identified a need, primarily in the need of facilities, in order to have a pot of money that we could use in order to make changes and improvements to our facilities.
So is that needed for the next 3 CIP cycles, or what was the intent behind that?
Right now, it's listed in there for the next 5 years at 2.3. And then I would have to ask Dr. Peak to talk to where that puts us at the end of 5 years and what projections he has, and asked him to speak to that. Dr. Peak?
Yeah, so I guess related to facilities, the 2.3 million was something we saw ongoing on an annual basis, and it speaks to the fact we have not had a capital facilities budget to address maintenance. I mean, what's included with that is, in that budget, we provided a list to you of the fire station renovations and repairs in the fire station, so that's coming out of that 2.3, as well as the other 183 facilities we have. The 24 million that we allocate for sales tax, we have averaged, I think over that 10-year process, of about 2.3 or 2.5 million coming from GO bond. So if council added street projects to the GO bond above that 2.5, that helps us get towards that aspirational goal of the PCI of 70. But if you want to stay within that $27 million cap, you're going to have to take something else out. I think a lot of what you see in our CIP, and it's just, appreciate the discussion on City Hall, there's so many asset pieces we have that have not had a systematic maintenance program. And so our assets have basically gotten to that point where they have to be replaced. And so whether you do that under a $27 million cap or more or less than that, we can only do so much, but those assets will continue to decline. Staff put the budget together because we feel that it is doable within all the other parameters we have from our financial perspective. We think it's the right thing to do to be aggressive under the current financial climate, because these things that we don't replace today will be more expensive to replace down the road.
And I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, we only have so much money, and continuing to borrow more and more, you know, we're betting on our children being able to repay that, and that suddenly has new significance to me as we move through this. That's a joke, people. My point is, you know, we're not going to be the ones to repay this debt. It'll be our kids. And what makes me nervous is that, you know, it's money is cheap now, yes, but it's not going to be in the future. And repaying this is going to be expensive to do. So, you know, it sounds to me like this was a permanent ask to change the policy to 37 million. And
Not that high.
No.
yeah,
Not that high, sir.
or I'm sorry, not 37 million, but
We could go as high as 39 million, but we're not proposing that.
my point is that this is an ask to change the policy instead of just, you know, an exemption for a couple of years, and that makes me nervous. I mean, I'm not opposed to an exemption for a couple of years, but to just blanket change the policy to borrow more money when we can't, you know, we can't foretell what's coming in the future, and that just makes me nervous. So I can't support that. If you could give me an idea how we, you know, if we did 3 years or 4 years, I'd be happy to propose that with a sunset, but just blanket raising it, I can't support that, so.
Deputy Mayor.
I'm on a roll tonight.
Go
It
for it.
amazes me that we can tell staff that pretend that we know more than they do about this stuff. But anyway, besides that, if you're going to do that, then are you prepared to tell the firefighters, sorry, we decided that it wasn't important enough to add this money to fix the fire stations? I mean, who are you prepared to tell? You know, we just couldn't do that. You'll have to do without. Are you going to tell the citizens, sorry, we couldn't do that road? Sorry, I mean.
Yep, with respect.
Wow.
That is our job.
To tell the firefighters?
Order.
If I could respond.
I'm not done.
Okay.
So our job is to protect our facilities. Our job is not to sit here and watch them fall down. Our job is to protect our firefighters and our police officers, and it's not to let them sit and live in condemned-like spaces. So I consider that my job. Now, if staff are saying they need that, maybe we just need to raise taxes then, because we can't just start telling people we can't do that. Our whole city is just going to start falling apart. I don't want my kids living in a city that's falling apart. I don't want my kids to wait 5, 10, 15 years and go, crap, why didn't these people take care of this stuff?
Councilman Jensen.
Thank
To
you,
be
Your Honor.
followed by Councilman Emerson.
So you're absolutely correct. That is the crux of our jobs and our responsibility, is to determine what resources the city has and how to best allocate them to meet the needs of the community. We only have so much money unless we raise taxes. I don't know if anybody up here is prepared to do that in order to address some of these needs, but yes, we have huge needs. So we have two options. We can either borrow money or raise taxes. If we borrow the money now, we're going to have to raise taxes in the future to pay for that. So the choice is ours, essentially. Do we borrow the money now and raise taxes later, or raise taxes now and pay cash? It's not a good answer. I mean, these are tough decisions to make, because these are real needs, and there's real people involved, absolutely. And yes, we do have to go back to our citizens and say, you know what? We can't afford to fix that road. I'm sorry, there just isn't enough revenue. We have to tell the firefighters, I'm sorry, we don't have enough money to fix your fire station right now. I mean, if we could just generate unlimited amounts of money, we could solve everybody's problems all at once. But that's not the reality of life. We only have so much money, and we can't borrow our way out of this problem. That's just not realistic. So my concern is that we're starting down a slippery slope, and next year they're going to come back and say, you know, we want to raise the debt limit again and again. United States Congress is famous for this, and now we're 20-some trillion in the hole because of that.
Just Councilman Emerson. Councilman Emerson, would you allow Ms. Lamondola?
Sorry, I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to clarify a piece. The CIP that we've presented is not dependent upon an increase in the debt service levy. So, just want to put that out there.
Would you mind elaborating a little bit on that?
Sure. The plan that we've presented is consistent with our current levy. So we would not be coming back next year and asking you to increase that debt service levy. And
So what you're saying is, if you would allow me to clarify, that even if there was an approval of the cap being raised a little so that we could take care of these projects, that increase in borrowing does not reflect an increase in mill levy.
Correct.
And for the long foreseeable future, the model that we show says that we could be at this level for 20 years, even at the 13 million level, which per year, which we're not proposing. We could extend this for 20-plus years and still continue to have our debt amount go down. So this is sustainable. If we identify that it's important to fix these projects, we can support it with the existing debt service levy. So we've done the research and we can do that. Obviously, though, that does mean increasing the GO bonding amount, which we haven't done for many, many years. And I understand that that's hard to consider as a proposal, but that's what we're looking at as staff and trying to determine. We can't let these things continue to go. We propose a plan that addresses them, that doesn't increase taxes with regards to the debt service levy. And so, and there are other factors that we make that decision on. Mrs. Lamondola can talk about the fact that there are other portions of our debt service policy that we are following with regards to the decision to do this. If you would just elaborate.
And other parts of the policy speak to intergenerational equity. It speaks to the governing body being a fiduciary responsibility to maintain our assets. And I think that as you're starting to look at the overall impact of the CIP and the growing infrastructure needs that we've identified, I think it's pretty essential that we take advantage of the current market. We issue debt that's within our current debt service levy to start to address those needs. The reason that it works within the current debt service levy is that we currently retire approximately $14 to $15 million a year of bond principal, but we've only been issuing $9. right? So you have that mismatch. So we can start to increase our borrowing on an annual basis, and as long as we stay within that overall principle, you're not issuing more than you're retiring, you're going to see a fairly level debt service. Assuming, again, we don't see some extreme spike in interest, but in the event you did that, then you pull back on your overall plan. But I think it's just really important to recognize that the plan we've put forward is within our mill levy and the debt service. We're not asking for more. We're asking to be able to do more for our residents, but not in the mill levy in terms of it being increased. And I think there's, beyond just the 27 million policy, and I know that I'm new, there are other aspects of the policy that I think should be taken with as much importance as the 27 million. I mean, if you look at a variety of debt service metrics that we use to compare ourselves to other municipalities, to compare ourselves to where we've been, to where we are now, we are still within our overall goals. I know the 27 million is a fairly easy number to refer to, but if you're looking at your overall goals, how it impacts your operating budget, how it impacts your citizens, how it impacts us, I just want to really stress that we are within what our recommended budget is within our mill levy. And I think speaking to intergenerational equity and the ideas that we don't want our children to, pick up where we left off, I also have a 3-year-old. We issue 15-year bonds on average, so I don't expect him to be generating a lot of income or paying taxes in that 15 years, but we can do a lot of good in the next 5 in terms of trying to catch up on our infrastructure, taking advantage of those rates.
Councilman Emerson, to be followed by Councilman Jensen.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that. So for purposes of our discussion, I guess to kind of get to maybe where we can move forward, we only really need to be talking about the next 3 years, correct? Because anything we do tonight is only setting the capital improvement budgets for the next 3 years, right? But it's important we probably do that because I know, Dr. Peak, he's going to be looking at street projects that this year he has to do design and right, or excuse me, next year he'll have to do design and right away. In 2021, relocation of utilities, and then do it in 2022 where we're doing widening. So if we're going to consider, it probably had to be for a minimum of 3 year. And like my colleagues, I do not have an appetite for saying something for 10 or 15 or 20 years. But if it will meaningfully move the needle on our PCI program, or especially if we can get ahead of some things and actually bend our costs down, I'm all for doing that in the short term, but I also don't want to make it a 20-year, 15-year deal. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
So that goes back to my question then. What's a reasonable amount of time that we could make the change to this policy, given that our stated goal is to get the city out of debt instead of continuing to stay in debt? And I realize that some debt is always going to be required for these projects, but the goal was, in setting this policy 2 years ago, was to start working toward getting out of debt instead of increasing the debt we have. And I know the long-term forecast showing us getting out of debt anyway, but being in debt is not a good place to be if you absolutely don't have to be. So, again, if somebody could give me a number we could make, a temporary change that would give us some effect on this, I'd be more comfortable than just the blanket policy change that's being proposed.
Well, I think as I look at the budget, Councilman, I look at what we're looking at. We have identified some specific needs related to the infrastructure, and both in facilities and in streets. If we were to go into the neighborhood of 11 million per year versus 9, I think as you look at what we've proposed over the 5 years, that would allow us to do the projects that we're proposing. With the work that we're doing related to asset management, related to our facilities and the rest of our infrastructure, we're going to be able to tell you in much greater detail where we're at and where we're accomplishing, where we're moving the needle in. And so if you were to look at it as a temporary situation to go 5 years at 11 million per year, we're going to make some changes and improvements in the facilities that we have and also our streets based on if you were to use part of the additional money for streets. So in our case, we're looking at, that would provide us some funding based on the changes that we made with regards to City Hall. City Hall will be something we'll have to address in the future that could impact where we go with that funding. But if you look at it, I think that at least in that, and that's just my look at it as a minimum, I would say 11 million per year would get us towards that, based on that we have put forward a budget that averages in the 11 to 13 million per year. And obviously, you look at some of the projects that we have in years 3 or 4 and 5, they may or may not be done based on what we're talking about. So
I think 5 years is reasonable.
I would actually say 3, and here's why. If we're considering this, the rest of this body may be turned over in 3 years. And the one thing that I don't want to ever do is to leave a burden on a future body, because we have had to do a lot of rectifying sometimes for things that have happened in the past. So if we are considering this, and what I want everybody to understand is that my impassionate advocacy for this occurring for only 3 years is only for a focus on infrastructure. And it's solely because our citizens have been asking for us to do some major changes in our infrastructure. So it's not that I'm saying, blatantly, let's raise the cap, make an extension to the policy forever, and let's change our policy. I'm saying let's have 3 years. We have a number from our city manager to raise it an additional 2 million, 3 million, to raise it to 11. With a focus on infrastructure works for the city, which would allow in the next cycle that the next council comes in and you have a new group of people sitting here, the opportunity to say back and say, this didn't work. We had the cap, we have to fix our street tax, we provided this to the staff, and it either has worked and we see that there's fruit, or it did not and it ceases.
Is that a friendly amendment?
As mayor, you would have to make that amendment, so I wouldn't.
All right, so I would make a friendly amendment then that we would make the exception for 11 million for 3 years, and then it would return to the $9 million cap.
For the
that's in our
purposes of
policy.
infrastructure?
For the purposes of infrastructure, yes.
Councilmember Jensen, I don't think there's a motion.
There is, I made it.
he said it at 27.
He made a motion and there was a second. And Mr. Emerson was a second.
Yes.
He has to agree to the friendly amendment.
So do you agree to the friendly amendment, sir?
Sure.
It's friendly.
Pretty friendly guy.
Okay, so now, Councilwoman Hiller.
Well, I'm not going to vote for it. The proposal that I have does not include pushing off any streets and could accommodate, I think, the South Gauge project. Sometimes the way you tackle this, or at least my preference is, that you look at whether there are things you can do management-wise, whether it's project management-wise, whether it's financial management-wise, whether it's in order to avoid just borrowing more money. I understand the concept of intergenerational equity, but fundamentally, borrowing policies are set up, are growth policies. They're assuming that you're going to have new people to pay for that, either new money or new people. We hope that we will have that, but we haven't for a while, and my preference is to make strategic investments, to be really cautious with our money, to manage what we have. 10 years ago, we didn't have money in any of our funds. Things were really a mess, and the economy turned down. At this point, thanks to diligent effort on the part of people who've come before those of us who are here, as well as people who are here, we've replenished those funds, and we're in pretty good shape financially. I think we can manage this, and I would like to personally stay at the 27 million right now anyway, and see what we can do. I don't want to put words in the city manager's mouth, but we've met a couple of times about this issue, and we've talked about those philosophical kinds of things that have been kicking around. What do you borrow money for, and what don't you, and what should the limits be, and so on. And if I can lob the ball over, at one point you said, maybe we should, once we get through this budget, have a session or more where we're simply talking about the philosophy of what we want to do, how we want to borrow money, but...
Well, excuse me, Mayor.
City Manager.
Mayor, governing body, I look at, related to what we borrow money for, I think the projects that you have before you are typically things that you would borrow money for. They're long-term projects. The only one that I look at concerns me and would be nice to be able to avoid doing is purchasing our fire trucks with long-term debt. But we're not in that position. We just haven't got there yet. And they are long-term assets. We keep them much longer than we keep any other of our vehicles. So forth. You look at the facility improvement line item, yes, there are some items there that won't be extremely long-lived, but we're talking about windows, we're talking about major improvements to the buildings and fixing those. So having, the way the resolution reads, moving it from 27 million over a 3-year period to 33 million over a 3-year period would give us, I think, a target that we can work with. The thing you need to remember is it is something that we come back and visit every year. It's part of the resolution every year. So if we do it for this year and then next year not comfortable with it, you can modify it to whatever way you want. So it isn't, I understand the concept of going to 5 years. We've done 3-year as our guiding principle because that's what we do with our capital improvement budget. So I would look that the amendment would be that it would be max of 33 million per year over. That way it gives us the flexibility that if we have a major project that needs to be 12 million in 1 year, it can be 10 in another. And so that gives us some flexibility to move that over that 3-year period in order to fit projects in with where they go, the best fit.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. And to kind of follow up with what Councilwoman Hiller said, my understanding was that we had to first have the policy decision whether there was even whether we might even think about raising it. I fully understand that, well, at least I believe that you're going to offer some amendments that might reduce it, and I'm all for that. I just thought we can't really consider anything until we at least set, this might happen. But I'm totally supportive of if there's things you can reduce. I'm totally supporting that. I just wanted to, we had to first establish if there was even the room to even consider things. That was.
Kind of like those bids.
That's
You
right.
set it high enough, you'll fill it up.
That's right.
All right, well, at this point, we have a motion that for 3 years, we would raise the cap to 33 for the 3 years. That sunsets. And that does not take into account any potential reductions and every year analyzing what we're going to do. So, yes, Councilman Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize for stopping everybody real quick. I know that we want to vote on this probably, but I feel like I need to explain. I am going to vote for this. The reason being is that all I hear about is fix our streets. Fix our streets, fix our streets. That's what everybody wants right now. I mean, you saw it when we even discussed a new flag. If you read any of the comments that people put online, all it said was fix our streets. Why are you doing anything except fixing our streets? And so if it takes additional bonding to do that and to show the people that we're listening and that that's what we're doing, I'll do that. And I know that, we had the sales tax. It was originally proposed to be a 3/4 sales tax to fix our streets. And we turned that down because we didn't want to raise taxes. And I know that there's a possibility that we may end up having to raise taxes to accommodate this at a later date. But I feel like right now, what people want are to fix our streets. And so I'm going to vote for this simply because I feel like that's the best path to get there. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Councilman Padilla.
Thank you. I'm also going to vote for it because we hear it over and over. I know that's not the only thing that we need to address, but it's the thing that I think overall throughout the city will make people feel like their voices have been heard. The one thing, though, I would ask, and I think I've heard it expressed from some of our council members here, is that the timeliness of communication and how we are updated on the progress of anything that we do. So if we're going to do infrastructure repair, if we're going to really address those streets, we need to know, not just in a weekly report, something out to the public. this is what we're doing. We need to hear it on a regular basis. I certainly don't want to wait for a quarterly or annual report. The community and the citizens need to know that we've taken this step because we've heard what they said. But we have to talk back to them and give them that information of how we're doing, because they have to hold us accountable for how we do that job. And we've talked a little bit about that in previous meetings. So the quality of the work has to be high standard, and we have to let the citizens know that we're doing it on a timely basis. So thank you.
Ms. Robertson.
I just want to clarify, Mayor, that the motion that was made was $11 million per year, and I think it was restated as $33 million over 3.
It was a friendly amendment that I accepted to give the city manager more
33?
flexibility.
Okay.
Okay.
Now that we have clarification, we proceed by voting. Oh, Councilman Lesser.
I'm not sure that we're ready. Can you please read the?
Mike. Mike, turn to Mike.
The amendment that we have is a 3-year term. It sits after 3 years, and it's a $33 million cap.
I'll clarify where it is in their resolution. That would make it a lot
It's
simpler.
on, I'm sorry, Councilmember Lesser, it's on line 24 in the resolution. Right now it states, which is greater than an aggregate of 27 million in GO bonds over a 3-year period. And so, as it's restated, it would be $33 million in GO bonds over a 3-year period.
So 6 million. And these projects that will be, when we bond them, will be on 15-year bonds?
Yes, sir.
So then if we decide that we're going to go back to where it was going to be, is that going to be done through retiring of older bonds?
We'll continue to make the payments on the bonds as they are purchased, and with a 15-year amortization, we expect that that will continue as our amount of amortization, whether we had a 33 million or a 27 million cap, depending on which year we're, it's going to end up being the same amortization for that. Is that what your question was, sir? It ends up being the same process that we currently have, whether you're doing a $33 million cap for the 3-year period or a 27 million cap for the 3-year period. We'll have the same bonding limitations relative to the amortization for those projects. And if we were to reduce, it would still be the same.
Okay.
Councilman Jensen?
Thank you, Your Honor. This governs the amount of new debt we're allowed to take out, not the amount of existing debt. Correct me if I'm wrong in any of that. So basically what we're saying is for the next 3-year period, we'll permit $11 million a year on average of debt, new debt, as opposed to just $9 million. So then after the 3-year period, the policy would then go back to the $9 million policy that we have now. So the existing $11 million or $33 million over 3 years, that debt would stay and get paid off at that rate, but we would go back to the policy of only borrowing $9 on average each year. And correct me if I'm wrong in any of that, please.
That's correct.
So.
Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess just additional clarification, we're retiring like 14 million a year, correct? So we're still retiring more each year than we'd be taking on even at the 11. Okay.
Yes.
I want to make sure of that because I want to make sure our debt isn't going up.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Hiller.
Maybe I should pass this out now. I was going to save it for the proposals, but I've been asking to do some modeling on how our debt would work, and got advised by staff that really I should just take the models that Nick did for us a while ago that showed how things would go if, with where we are today, if we borrow just $9 million a year, and then the other figure that staff had used is 13. So this is going to show 13. But just so you can see it, what I did was go into our financial reports and look at how much per year we've been on average going through in the debt service fund. And it's basically 21 million on average. When you look at the top line that says 2019, that's the figures from Nick's model on how much our debt service would be. In the middle set, it's for 9 million a year, and the right-hand set is for 13. What I just want you to do is you just scan down the column of net funds available. With 9 million a year, if 21 million is what our debt service fund has been using, we have money left over, particularly for the first 5 years, or 4 years, there's a little bit of a squeeze there, and then it starts to really add in terms of how much money we have left over till where there's 9 million after 20 years. On the 13 million a year, what you see is that after we go about 3 years, and I understand your 11 is less than that, there's not enough money within what we've usually been spending to make the debt service payment. And so we would have to dip into, right now there's a cushion of 6 to 8 million in the debt service fund. And the staff is wanting to keep that there. So it would be covered. But in terms of what we've been spending every year at the 13 million a year level, it would squeeze. And at the 11 million level as well, I would suggest. We would have to start to take out of those excess reserves. So I just wanted you to know it. I mean, if you assume that 11 million is halfway between the 9 million and the 13, you can kind of figure it out.
City Manager?
When we looked at this, we did look at, and we presented this to you, this is the numbers that we utilized. And Nick might be able to explain them better, but related to this, we're prepared that you could cover this relative to the fund balance. The fund balance can only be used to retire debt. That's the only way it can be used. It can't be used to purchase a fire station or a fire truck or anything like that. It can only be used to retire debt. So we have a fund balance there that has grown, and we utilize that to capture interest that we then put back into the fund. So from that, we look at the numbers, and yes, they do trend this way related to what we're able to cover for the funding amounts of 11 million or 13 million or 9 million based on what they're there. So we feel confident. I think this verifies that you can increase your bonding amount and still be able to cover the expense that would come with borrowing 11 million or even 13 million, even though that's not what we're considering here with this current motion.
And furthermore, this is if we do it permanently.
Right,
correct?
This would be continual
and this is not just the 3 years
purchases
that
of
we're
that
doing
amount,
right now.
correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
You have anything I missed, Nick? Okay, nope, we're good.
Yes, Councilman Jensen.
I appreciate you providing this. It does show that in the long term, it might be a bit of a squeeze, but for the next 3 years, it looks like we could do this fairly comfortably. So this does reinforce that a temporary increase is probably a prudent decision to try and get a jump on that, not a permanent one. So thank you for providing this information. It's very timely. With that, I will call the question.
We have 2 council members missing, Councilwoman Clear and Councilman Lesser.
He's coming.
He's coming.
The question has been called. I don't see objections, or do I have an objection? Okay, no objections. So the question has been called. The motion on the table that we're voting on at this point in time is to increase in the next 3 years our cap to be $33 million for those 3 years only, with the purposes of infrastructure work only. Okay, so we proceed with voting.
We have 6 yes. Council members Hiller, Ortiz, Cohen, and Lesser voting no.
6 having voting yes, that motion passes. We now proceed with additional amendments. Oh, I am being asked for a break. It's 7 o'clock. We started at 5 o'clock, so we will take a 10-minute recess, and we will continue with the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.